At 16, Mai had learned more about life than most people her age. Her childhood was stolen the moment she had to cradle her newborn son in her arms. The first time she heard his cry, a part of her shattered under the overwhelming weight of responsibility, fear, and hopelessness. She had become a mother far too early, and while her peers worried about school dances or part-time jobs, Mai worried about formula and finding enough money to cover the rent of their one-bedroom apartment. Her father wasn't any help, not since gambling had swallowed his life. His days were spent in dingy parlors, betting what little they had, and his nights, well, they were filled with rage, especially on the days he lost, which was most days. Mai had long ago grown used to the sounds of fists against walls, and sometimes worse. The bruises her mother used to hide had become Mai's reality. It was almost as if the universe was determined to see how much she could handle. Her mother had left years ago, choosing to run from the chaos rather than face it head-on. Mai had stayed because she had no choice. There was no running from this life. She had a child now, a responsibility she couldn't abandon like her mother had done. To survive, she did what she had to, working in a massage parlor, enduring the eyes of men who saw her as nothing more than an object, and facing the whispers of judgment that trailed her wherever she went. But there was nothing else she could do. Every penny she made went to feeding her son and paying off her father's growing debts. Mai often wondered if this was her fate, to be stuck in this never-ending cycle of survival without ever truly living. Love, dreams, happiness, those were for other people, people who hadn't been beaten down by the weight of the world at such a young age. But then one evening, as she closed up the parlor, a man walked in, his presence almost startling in its difference. He didn't have the usual sleaze in his eyes. There was something gentle, almost curious about the way he looked at her. "Is it too late for a massage?" he asked, smiling softly. Mai hesitated, glancing at the clock. She wanted to say no, wanted to send him away and crawl back to her dingy apartment to collapse in bed, but something about him made her pause. She gave a nod, motioning him to the back room. As she worked, her hands moving automatically through the motions she had memorized long ago, he began to talk. It wasn't like the other clients, who tried to flirt or make crude comments. He talked about the world, about dreams, about life. His name was Tom, and he had an air of freedom about him, the kind that Mai had long since forgotten existed. "I can tell you're different," he said quietly as she worked, his voice thoughtful. "You don't belong here." Mai froze at his words, her heart pounding in her chest. It was as if he could see right through the mask she wore, the one that kept her safe from the judgment of the world. She didn't respond, focusing instead on her task. When the session was over, Tom stood up, reaching into his wallet. But instead of handing her the money, he placed it gently on the counter, his eyes never leaving hers. "You deserve better than this," he said softly. "Don't forget that." His words haunted her long after he left. She had grown used to the looks of pity, the judgments, and even the occasional kindness. But there was something different about Tom. His gaze wasn't filled with pity or desire. It was filled with something she hadn't felt in a long time. Hope. For the first time in years, Mai allowed herself to dream, just a little. Maybe, just maybe, she didn't have to live this life forever. Maybe there was a way out. But deep down, she knew better than to hope. Dreams were dangerous, especially for someone like her. Still, she couldn't help but replay his words in her mind, over and over again, like a lifeline she was too afraid to grab. Days passed, and life continued for Mai in the same grim routine. The early morning started with getting her son ready for daycare before heading to the massage parlor. The familiar stench of desperation clung to the air in the tiny apartment, and her father had become little more than a shadow that haunted the corners of her life, slipping in and out of consciousness after losing whatever small sum of money he could borrow or steal. Yet, amidst the mundane and the misery, Mai found herself thinking of Tom more than she liked to admit. His voice, the way he looked at her, not with the judgment or expectation she was so used to, but with a kind of openness. She told herself it didn't matter, that men like him didn't fall for women like her. They may flirt for a while, but in the end, people like him didn't stay. Still, when he showed up again at the parlor a week later, the same soft smile on his face, Mai's heart skipped a beat. She didn't know what she was expecting. but certainly not him returning. She thought it had been a momentary encounter, one that would quickly fade into the background of her difficult life. Tom seemed different again, not as a stranger, but as someone with a genuine interest. He greeted her warmly and asked for another session, but this time, instead of talking about random subjects, he asked about her. "What's your story, Mai?" he said as he settled onto the massage table. "I've been thinking about you. You seem stuck, like someone who's just waiting for something to change." His words hit too close to home, and Mai was silent for a long moment, her hands hovering just above his shoulders. It was dangerous to talk about herself. She'd learned the hard way that vulnerability was often a trap. But something in Tom's tone made her want to share just a little. "I don't have much of a story," she said softly, her hands finally moving, kneading the tension out of his muscles. "Just surviving, I guess." "That's not nothing," Tom replied. "It takes a lot of strength to survive, especially in a world like this." She was quiet again, surprised by how his words made her chest tighten. She wasn't used to being seen as strong. Most people pitied her or ignored her struggles, pretending they didn't exist. But Tom was different, and it was unsettling how much she liked it. "Do you have family?" he asked gently, sensing her reluctance to talk, but pushing just enough to keep the conversation going. Mai hesitated, but before she could stop herself, the words spilled out. "A son. He's 4 now." She didn't mention the father or the circumstances of her life. That was a darkness she wasn't ready to share. Tom's response wasn't what she expected. There was no surprise, no judgment, just a simple nod of understanding. "You must love him a lot. I can tell you're doing everything you can for him." It was as if Tom had a way of peeling back the layers of her defenses without her even noticing. They continued talking through the session, and by the time it was over, Mai felt something she hadn't felt in a long time, a strange sense of lightness, as if a burden had been lifted, if only for a little while. After that, Tom started visiting regularly. He never pressured her, never crossed any lines, but each visit became more personal, their conversations deeper. He asked about her dreams, her son, her childhood, and in return, he told her about his life, about his love for painting, his travels, his mother, who he adored but admitted could be overbearing at times. It was during one of these conversations that Tom asked the question Mai had been dreading. "Why are you still here, Mai? You deserve more than this." Her heart clenched at his words. She knew it. Deep down, she had always known it, but the reality of her situation was suffocating. She had no education, no savings, and a mountain of debt left by her father. She was tethered to this life whether she liked it or not. "I can't just leave," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "There's my son and my father, the debt." Tom leaned forward, his eyes soft but serious. "What if I could help you?" Mai's heart pounded in her chest, the words too good to be true. She wanted to laugh, to push him away and tell him that she didn't need saving. But the truth was, she did. And that terrified her more than anything. "You can't fix this," she said, her voice shaking slightly. "No one can." Tom shook his head, his expression resolute. "I don't want to fix it for you, Mai. I just want to help you. You deserve a chance at happiness, at a life that isn't just about survival." For the first time in a long time, Mai felt tears prickling at the corners of her eyes. She had always been so careful not to hope, not to dream. But Tom was offering her something she hadn't even dared to wish for, a chance to start over. "I don't know how," she whispered, her voice breaking. Tom reached out, gently taking her hand. "We'll figure it out together. You don't have to do this alone." It was in that moment that something inside Mai shifted. She had been running on autopilot for so long, just trying to make it through each day. But now, for the first time, she allowed herself to imagine a different future, one where she wasn't defined by her past or her circumstances. It scared her, but it also filled her with a strange, unfamiliar hope. The days that followed felt like a strange dream for Mai. She continued with her routine, waking up before dawn, sending her son off to daycare, and working long hours at the massage parlor. But there was a subtle shift in her heart. A tiny spark of hope had ignited deep inside her, a spark she hadn't felt in years. Tom kept coming back. It was always under the guise of a massage, but Mai knew it was more than that now. He was her anchor in a world that often felt like it was spinning out of control. Each visit was like a lifeline thrown to her when she felt like she was drowning in the sea of responsibilities and shame. One afternoon, after closing up the parlor early, Tom asked her to step outside with him. He hadn't mentioned where they were going, and Mai was hesitant, feeling the weight of her obligations pulling her back. But something inside her, something daring and curious, urged her to follow him. They walked together through the crowded streets, the noise and chaos of the city swirling around them. Tom didn't say much, and for once, neither did she. It was a comfortable silence, the kind that felt like an escape from everything that weighed her down. After a while, they reached a quiet park on the edge of the city. The sun was beginning to set, casting a warm orange glow over the trees and the empty benches. Tom motioned for her to sit, and she hesitated for only a second before sinking into the seat beside him. "I come here to think sometimes," Tom said quietly, his eyes fixed on the horizon. "There's something peaceful about watching the sunset. It reminds me that no matter how hard life gets, there's always something beautiful at the end of the day." Mai nodded, her gaze following his. The sky was painted in brilliant shades of orange, pink, and purple. It was a sight she hadn't taken the time to notice in years. Life had been so full of survival that moments like these felt like a luxury she couldn't afford. "I don't remember the last time I saw a sunset," she admitted, her voice soft and full of regret. Tom turned to her, his expression gentle. "That's why I brought you here. You deserve to see the beauty in life again, Mai. You deserve more than just getting by." Her heart clenched at his words. How many times had she told herself that she didn't deserve happiness? That her choices had led her to this life, and she had no right to wish for anything more? But here was Tom, looking at her like she was worthy of something better. "I don't know how to live any other way," she said, her voice barely audible. "I've been in survival mode for so long. I don't even know where to start." Tom was quiet for a moment, his eyes never leaving hers. "You don't have to figure it all out at once. Sometimes, the first step is just letting yourself believe that you deserve happiness. The rest will come." Mai didn't know what to say. The idea of happiness had always felt like a distant dream, something reserved for other people, people who hadn't made the mistakes she had, who didn't have the baggage she carried. But here was Tom, offering her the possibility of something she hadn't dared to hope for. "You talk like it's that easy," she said with a small, bitter laugh. "Like all I have to do is wish for a better life, and it'll just happen." Tom shook his head, a smile tugging at the corners of his lips. "It's not easy, but it's possible, and that's what matters." For a long moment, they sat in silence, the only sound being the distant hum of the city and the soft rustle of leaves in the breeze. Mai didn't know what to make of Tom's optimism, his unwavering belief that life could be better. But as they sat there, watching the sunset together, a tiny part of her began to wonder if he was right. That night, as Mai lay in bed, the usual weight of exhaustion pressing down on her, she found her mind drifting to Tom's words. Could it really be that simple? Could she allow herself to believe that happiness was possible, that she was worthy of more than just surviving? The next morning, when she woke up, something was different. It wasn't as if her problems had disappeared. Her father was still lost to his gambling addiction, the debts were still piling up, and her son still needed her to provide for him. But there was a shift inside her, a small but significant change. For the first time in a long time, Mai felt a flicker of something other than despair. She was still hesitant, still unsure of what the future held, but there was a part of her that was curious. What if Tom was right? What if there was a way out of this life, a way to find happiness not just for herself, but for her son too? As the day went on, Mai found herself thinking about possibilities she had long since buried. Maybe she could go back to school. Maybe she could find a way to get out from under her father's debts. Maybe she could build a life that didn't revolve around the parlor or the weight of her past mistakes. Tom continued to visit her, and their conversations became more frequent, more intimate. He encouraged her to dream, to believe in the possibility of a future where she wasn't just surviving. And slowly, little by little, Mai began to allow herself to hope. One evening, as they sat together in the park again, watching the sunset, Tom turned to her with a serious expression. "I've been thinking," he said quietly. "There's a way we can make this work. You and me. We can start over. Mai's heart skipped a beat, her mind racing with both excitement and fear. Start over. It sounded like a dream, but it also sounded impossible. How? She asked, her voice barely above a whisper. We could leave this place, Tom said, his eyes searching hers. You and your son. We could go somewhere new, somewhere you don't have to carry the weight of your father's debts or the judgment of the people here. We could build a life together. It was everything Mai had secretly longed for, but never dared to hope for. The thought of leaving, of starting fresh with Tom, was both thrilling and terrifying. I can't just leave, she said, her voice trembling. My father, he needs me. Tom reached out, gently taking her hand. You don't owe him your life, Mai. You've done more than enough. Now it's time to take care of yourself and your son. The truth of his words hit her hard. She had spent so long taking care of everyone else, sacrificing her own happiness for the sake of others. But maybe it was time to choose herself, to choose a future where she wasn't just surviving, but truly living. As they sat there, the sky darkening into night, Mai made a decision. It wasn't going to be easy, and she wasn't sure how it would all work out. But she knew one thing for certain. She wasn't going to let this opportunity slip through her fingers. She was going to fight for her happiness. The decision to leave weighed heavily on Mai's mind in the days that followed. It was one thing to dream of escaping, but quite another to act on it. The reality of her situation seemed insurmountable. Her father, who had once been a source of love and protection, had become a weight around her neck. And then there was her son, the center of her world, who needed stability more than anything. But Tom was persistent. Every day he reminded her that she had the right to choose a different path, that there was a way out. His words were a constant comfort, but they also made the decision more difficult. Could she really walk away from the life she'd known, no matter how painful it had become? One evening, after putting her son to bed, Mai sat down at the worn kitchen table, her head in her hands. The apartment was dark and quiet, save for the occasional rustling of her father in the other room, nursing a drink. The weight of her father's presence was suffocating. Every day she stayed felt like another day spent trapped in a life that wasn't hers. She thought of Tom, of his easy smile and his unwavering belief in her. He was offering her an escape, a chance to build something new, something better. But even as she yearned for it, there was something holding her back, something more than just her father or the debts. It was fear. Fear of the unknown, fear of what leaving might mean for her and her son. She had spent so long surviving that the idea of truly living seemed impossible, almost dangerous. What if it didn't work out? What if Tom eventually tired of her and her baggage? What if she failed? The thoughts churned in her mind, creating a storm of doubt and anxiety that left her paralyzed. She couldn't afford to make a mistake, not with her son's future at stake. That night, Mai didn't sleep. She lay awake, staring at the ceiling, her mind racing. She had been strong enough to survive this long, but now she needed a different kind of strength. The strength to walk away, to take a leap of faith into an uncertain future. The next day, she decided to visit her father. He was at the local gambling den, as usual. When she found him, he was hunched over a table, a cigarette hanging from his lips, the remnants of his latest losses scattered before him. He barely looked up when she approached. "Dad," she said quietly, standing beside him. "We need to talk." He grunted, his eyes glued to the cards in front of him. "What about?" Mai took a deep breath. This wasn't going to be easy, but she had to try. "I'm thinking of leaving, taking Ben and starting over somewhere else." Her father finally looked up, his bloodshot eyes narrowing in confusion. "What are you talking about?" "I can't stay here anymore," Mai said, her voice firm. "It's not good for Ben, and it's not good for me. I'm gonna leave, and I think it's time you took care of yourself too." Her father scoffed, his face twisted with bitterness. "So you're just going to abandon me? Like your mother did?" The accusation stung, but Mai didn't back down. "I've been taking care of you for years, Dad. I've done everything I can to help you, but I can't keep living like this. I need to think about my son, about his future." Her father's face hardened, his lips curling into a sneer. "You're just like her. She left us, and now you're doing the same thing, running away because things got tough." Mai felt the familiar sting of guilt rising in her chest, but she pushed it down. This wasn't about her father anymore. It was about her son. I'm not running away, she said quietly. I'm choosing to live. For me and for Ben. Her father shook his head, returning his gaze to the cards in front of him. Go on then. Leave. But don't expect me to be here when you come crawling back. Mai's heart ached at his words, but she knew they came from a place of pain. Her father had been broken by his own demons, and no matter how much she had tried to save him, she couldn't. This was something he had to face on his own. I hope you find peace, Dad, she whispered before turning and walking away. As she left the gambling den, a strange sense of relief washed over her. It was as if a heavy weight had been lifted from her shoulders. The conversation with her father had been painful, but it had also been necessary. For the first time in years, she had made a decision for herself, not out of obligation or guilt, but out of love, for herself and for her son. Later that evening, when she met Tom in the park, she told him about her conversation with her father. Tom listened quietly, his expression thoughtful as she recounted the painful details. You did the right thing, he said softly when she had finished. You've given so much of yourself to others, but now it's time to take care of yourself and Ben. Mai nodded, though the weight of the decision still lingered in her chest. I don't know if I'm strong enough to do this, she admitted, her voice trembling. Tom reached out, taking her hand in his. You're stronger than you think, Mai. You've survived so much already. Now it's time to live. His words, so simple yet so powerful, struck a chord deep within her. She had spent so long being strong for others, but now it was time to be strong for herself. It was time to take the leap, to embrace the uncertainty, and to trust that she could build a better life. They sat in silence for a while, the evening air cool against their skin. Mai found herself staring at the horizon, where the last remnants of daylight were fading into the night. It felt symbolic. One chapter of her life was closing, and a new one was beginning. I'm scared, she admitted after a long pause, her voice barely above a whisper. Tom squeezed her hand gently. I know, but I'll be with you every step of the way. For the first time in a long time, Mai believed him. There was still fear, still doubt, but there was also something else, hope. It was fragile, like a delicate flame, but it was there, and that was enough. A few days after her conversation with her father, Mai began to set things in motion. The decision to leave was no longer just a distant dream. It was becoming a plan, something tangible. But with each passing day, the reality of what she was about to do felt heavier. Packing her meager belongings, deciding how to tell Ben, and preparing for the final goodbye to the life she had known. It all seemed too much to bear. Tom was by her side, constantly reassuring her that they would get through it together. His unwavering support gave her strength, but it also made her realize just how much she had come to rely on him. That thought scared her. She had spent years building walls around her heart, believing that love was something she didn't deserve, something too dangerous to pursue. But Tom had slipped past her defenses, and now she wasn't sure if she could survive without him. One afternoon, after picking Ben up from daycare, Mai sat her son down in their tiny kitchen. He was playing with his favorite toy car, oblivious to the world of worry that surrounded him. As she watched him, her heart swelled with love and fear. Ben was everything to her. She had made every sacrifice for him, but now she was about to uproot his life. Ben, she said softly, pulling him onto her lap. Mommy needs to talk to you. He looked up at her with his big, innocent eyes, still too young to understand the weight of her words. What is it, Mommy? Mai stroked his hair, trying to find the right words. We're going to move, sweetheart. We're going to a new place where things will be better for us. You and me. It's going to be an adventure. Ben's face scrunched up in confusion. Move? Why? It's hard to explain, baby, Mai said, her voice tight with emotion. But where we're going, things will be easier. We'll have a new home, and you'll make new friends. Why? It'll be good for us. Ben stared at her for a moment before nodding slowly. Will Grandpa come too? Mai's heart broke a little at his question. She hadn't told Ben much about her father's struggles, but the little boy still loved him in his own innocent way. No, Grandpa's going to stay here. But we'll visit him sometimes, okay? Okay, Ben said quietly, though he didn't fully understand. Mai kissed his forehead, her chest tight with a mix of relief and sorrow. She didn't know how this change would affect Ben, but she knew it was the best decision for them both. The life they had been living wasn't sustainable, and staying any longer would have crushed both of them. The next few days were a blur of preparation. Tom helped her pack, though there wasn't much to take with them. Most of what Mai owned was either too old or too broken to bother with. She took only what was essential: clothes for her and Ben, a few personal items, and a small amount of cash she had managed to save over the years. It wasn't much, but it was a start. As the day of their departure drew closer, the reality of leaving began to sink in. Mai had spent her entire life in this city, surrounded by the chaos and hardship that had defined her existence. Walking away from it felt like abandoning a part of herself, even if it was a part she no longer wanted. The hardest goodbye was to her father. She hadn't spoken to him since their confrontation at the gambling den, and as much as she wanted to leave without another word, she knew she couldn't. He was still her father, and despite everything, a part of her still loved him. The night before she was set to leave, Mai went to see him one last time. When she arrived at the apartment, the familiar smell of smoke and alcohol hit her like a wave. Her father was slouched in his chair, a half-empty bottle of whiskey in his hand. He didn't look up when she entered. "I'm leaving tomorrow," she said quietly, standing in the doorway. "I wanted to say goodbye." Her father grunted but didn't respond. Mai sighed, taking a step closer. "I don't know if you care, but I wanted you to know that I love you. I always have. But I can't stay here anymore, Dad. I need to do what's right for Ben." For a long moment, there was silence. Then, without looking at her, her father spoke, his voice slurred but tinged with regret. "I know, Mai. I know you've done more for me than I deserve." Mai felt tears prick at the corners of her eyes. This was the closest he had ever come to acknowledging the pain he had caused her, and it made her heart ache even more. "You could still get help," she said, her voice trembling. "It's not too late." Her father shook his head, finally looking up at her with tired, bloodshot eyes. "It's too late for me, kid, but not for you. You go, take care of that boy. Don't make the same mistakes I did." Mai wanted to say something, to offer more comfort, but she knew it wouldn't matter. Her father had made his choices, and no amount of pleading would change that. So instead, she nodded and turned to leave. "Goodbye, Dad," she whispered as she walked out of the apartment for the last time. The next morning, Mai, Ben, and Tom packed into his car. Ben sat in the back seat, clutching his toy car, while Mai stared out the window, watching the city she had called home fade into the distance. Her heart was heavy, but for the first time, it wasn't weighed down by hopelessness. They drove for hours, the landscape changing from the concrete jungle of the city to the wide-open spaces of the countryside. Mai found herself feeling a strange mix of fear and exhilaration. She was leaving everything she had ever known behind, stepping into a future that was entirely uncertain. But she wasn't doing it alone. As they drove, Tom reached over and took her hand, giving it a gentle squeeze. Mai looked at him, her heart swelling with gratitude and love. He had given her the courage to dream again, to believe that she could have a life beyond the one she had been trapped in for so long. "We're almost there," Tom said with a smile. "A fresh start." Mai smiled back, though her stomach fluttered with nerves. She had no idea what lay ahead, but she knew one thing for sure: she was no longer just surviving. She was living. And that made all the difference. As the car rolled into a small, quiet town nestled between rolling hills and lush greenery, Mai felt a sense of peace wash over her. This was it, their new beginning. A place where the past couldn't follow them, where they could build something beautiful together. Mai looked back at Ben, who was fast asleep in his car seat, and then at Tom, who had been her rock through it all. She didn't know what the future held, but for the first time in a long time, she was ready to face it head-on. Together, they would make this work. Against all odds, they had found each other, and against all odds, they would find happiness. The small town was nothing like the city Mai had known. It was quiet, peaceful, and far removed from the chaos that had dominated her life for so long. The streets were lined with trees, and the houses had a charming simplicity to them. It felt like a world away from the grime and noise she had left behind. As Tom pulled the car into the driveway of their new home, Mai felt a strange mix of excitement and trepidation. The house was modest, a small cottage with a white picket fence and a garden that had seen better days, but to her, it looked like a castle. It was more than she had ever hoped for, more than she had ever thought she deserved. Ben, who had woken up during the drive, stared wide-eyed at the house. "Is this where we live now, Mommy?" he asked, his voice filled with awe. Mai smiled and nodded, her heart swelling with love for her son. "Yes, sweetheart, this is our new home." Ben's face lit up, and he scrambled out of the car, running toward the front door. Tom laughed as he followed, pulling a set of keys from his pocket and handing them to Mai. "It's all yours," he said softly. Mai stood there for a moment, holding the keys in her hand and staring at the house. It felt surreal. After everything she had been through, after all the struggles and pain, she was finally standing on the threshold of a new life, a life that was hers to build. She took a deep breath and walked up to the door, unlocking it with shaking hands. The inside of the house was simple but warm. The living room had a cozy fireplace, and the kitchen, though small, was bright and welcoming. There were 2 bedrooms, one for her and one for Ben. It wasn't much, but it was perfect. As Mai walked through the house, she felt a strange sense of calm settle over her. This was it, the fresh start she had dreamed of. There were no ghosts from her past here, no reminders of the pain she had endured. For the first time, she felt like she had a real chance at happiness. Tom helped her bring in the few bags they had packed, and soon the house was filled with the sound of Ben's laughter as he explored every corner. It was a sound Mai hadn't heard in a long time, pure, unfiltered joy. It made her heart ache in the best possible way. That evening, they sat together around the small kitchen table for their first meal in the new house. It wasn't anything fancy, just takeout from the local diner, but to Mai, it felt like a feast. They laughed and talked, and for the first time in years, Mai felt like she belonged somewhere. As the evening wore on, and Ben's eyelids grew heavy with sleep, Tom and Mai sat together on the front porch, watching the stars twinkle in the clear night sky. The air was cool and crisp, and the sounds of the town were quiet and peaceful. "Do you think we can really make this work?" Mai asked softly, her voice filled with uncertainty. Tom turned to her, his expression serious, but full of warmth. "I know we can. It won't always be easy, but we'll face it together." Mai smiled, her heart full. Tom had been her lifeline, the person who had pulled her out of the darkness and shown her that she was capable of more than just surviving. He had given her hope when she had none, and now, sitting here with him in their new home, she felt something she hadn't felt in a long time: gratitude. "I'm scared," she admitted, her voice barely a whisper. Tom reached out, taking her hand in his. "It's okay to be scared. Change is always scary, but you don't have to do it alone." Mai leaned into him, resting her head on his shoulder as they watched the stars together. The future was still uncertain, and there would undoubtedly be challenges ahead, but for the first time, she wasn't afraid of what was to come. She had Tom, she had Ben, and she had a chance at a new beginning. That night, after putting Ben to bed, Mai lay in her own room, staring at the ceiling. The house was quiet, but instead of the suffocating silence she had known in her old apartment, this silence was comforting. It was the kind of quiet that spoke of peace, of safety, of a future that wasn't ruled by fear or regret. She closed her eyes, letting herself imagine what this new life could be. She pictured Ben growing up in this house, going to school, making friends, and living a life free from the burdens of her past. She pictured herself finding work, maybe even going back to school like she had once dreamed. And she pictured Tom by her side, not as her savior, but as her partner in building a future they both deserved. For the first time in a long time, Mai allowed herself to feel hopeful. She had been through so much, but she had survived, and now she was ready to live. The days that followed were filled with small victories. Ben quickly adjusted to his new surroundings, making friends with the neighborhood kids and starting at a nearby preschool. Mai found a part-time job at a local cafe, a place where the customers smiled and asked how she was doing, where the work was hard but satisfying. Tom continued to be a steady presence in her life, supporting her every step of the way. He worked as a freelance artist, spending his days painting in the small studio he had set up in their house. His art had always been a source of joy for him, and now that they were in a place of peace, he found himself more inspired than ever. Life wasn't perfect, but it was good. Better than Mai had ever hoped it could be. But even as she settled into this new rhythm, there were moments when the past would creep back in. Late at night, when the house was quiet and the weight of the day pressed down on her, Mai would sometimes find herself thinking of the life she had left behind, the pain, the struggles, the people she had lost. She thought of her father, of the man he had once been before gambling and alcohol had consumed him. She wondered if he was still in that dingy apartment, nursing his bottle, or if he had finally found the strength to change. A part of her still ached for him, but she knew that some battles were not hers to fight. One evening, as she and Tom sat on the porch after dinner, Mai brought up her father for the first time in weeks. "Do you think people can really change?" she asked, her voice quiet. Tom looked at her thoughtfully. "I think people can change if they really want to, but it's not easy. It takes time, and sometimes they need to hit rock bottom before they realize it." Mai nodded, her heart heavy with the weight of that truth. She had spent so long trying to save her father, trying to pull him back from the edge, but in the end, he had to save himself. "I hope he finds his way," she said softly, more to herself than to Tom. Tom squeezed her hand gently. "You've done everything you could for him, Mai. Now it's time to focus on you and Ben. This is your chance to live the life you deserve." Mai smiled, though the sadness lingered. She knew Tom was right, but letting go of the past was harder than she had imagined. Still, with each passing day, she found herself more focused on the present and the future she was building. And with Tom and Ben by her side, she was finally beginning to believe that happiness was within reach. Shadows from the past. The days in the small town stretched into weeks, and Mai's new life began to feel more familiar. She fell into a routine, waking up early to make breakfast for Ben, walking him to preschool, and then heading to her job at the cafe. The customers were kind, and her coworkers had welcomed her with open arms. Life was simple but peaceful, and with each passing day, Mai began to believe that she could truly leave her past behind. Tom, too, was flourishing. His art had taken on new dimensions, the quiet beauty of the town inspiring him in ways he hadn't expected. They spent evenings together in front of the fireplace, talking about their dreams for the future, planning trips they would take once Ben was older, and imagining the life they could build together. But despite the peace they had found, Mai couldn't shake the feeling that something was lurking in the background, waiting to disrupt the delicate balance they had created. It was as if her past, though far behind her, still had a hold on her heart, pulling at her when she least expected it. One evening, after putting Ben to bed, Mai sat on the porch, staring out at the quiet street. Tom was inside, finishing a painting he had been working on for days, and for the first time in weeks, Mai felt alone. The darkness of the night seemed to mirror the darkness of her thoughts, and memories of her father, of the life she had escaped, began to resurface. She thought about the debts he had left behind, the way his addiction had consumed him, and the toll it had taken on her. Though she had walked away, she couldn't help but wonder what had become of him. Had he found a way out, or had he sunk deeper into his vices? Just as the weight of her thoughts began to overwhelm her, the soft sound of footsteps broke the silence. Mai looked up to see Tom standing in the doorway, his brow furrowed with concern. "You okay?" he asked gently, sitting down beside her. Mai nodded, though she knew Tom could see through her. "I'm fine," she said softly, though her voice lacked conviction. Tom didn't press her, but he reached for her hand, his touch warm and reassuring. "You've been quiet these last few days. I can tell something's bothering you." Mai sighed, leaning her head against his shoulder. She didn't want to burden Tom with her worries, but she also knew she couldn't keep them bottled up forever. "I keep thinking about my father," she admitted. "I keep wondering if he's okay, if he's even still alive." Tom was quiet for a moment, his arm wrapped around her shoulders. "It's natural to think about him. He's your father, and no matter what's happened, that bond doesn't just disappear." "I know," Mai said, her voice barely a whisper. "But I left him, Tom. I just walked away. I don't know if he's still drowning in his addiction or if he's found a way to pull himself out." "You had to leave," Tom reminded her gently. "You couldn't save him, Mai. You tried for years, and it wasn't your responsibility to fix him. It still isn't." Mai knew Tom was right, but the guilt still gnawed at her. What if he's worse now? What if he's completely alone? Tom sighed, his expression thoughtful. You've done more for him than most people would, but at some point, people have to take responsibility for their own lives. You can't carry the weight of his choices forever. Mai closed her eyes, letting his words sink in. She had carried the burden of her father's failures for so long that she didn't know how to let go. But she also knew that holding on to the past would only keep her trapped in a cycle of guilt and pain. I don't know if I can let go, she said softly, her voice trembling. Tom squeezed her hand gently. It's not about letting go, Mai. It's about accepting that you've done all you can. Your father's journey is his own now. You've given him chances, and now it's time to give yourself a chance to really live. Mai leaned into him, grateful for his unwavering support. Tom had been her rock, her guide out of the darkness, but even he couldn't make the past disappear. Only she could make the choice to move forward. As they sat in silence, the weight of her thoughts slowly began to lift. Mai realized that no matter how much she cared about her father, she couldn't go back. The life she had now, the peace she had found with Tom and Ben, was too precious to risk. The following week, something unexpected happened. As Mai was closing up the cafe one evening, her phone rang. She glanced at the screen, her heart skipping a beat when she saw an unfamiliar number. Hesitating for a moment, she answered. "Hello?" she said cautiously. There was a pause on the other end, and then a voice she hadn't heard in years. "Mai, it's Dad." Her heart stopped. For a moment, she couldn't breathe, couldn't think. She had spent so long wondering if her father was still alive, and now here he was reaching out to her. But his voice sounded different, weaker, defeated. "Dad," she whispered, her voice shaking. Is everything okay?" There was a long pause before he spoke again. "No, it's not. I need help, Mai. I'm sorry, but I don't know who else to turn to." Mai's mind raced, her emotions a whirlwind of confusion, anger, and heartbreak. She had spent years trying to help him, trying to pull him out of the darkness, only to be dragged down with him. And now, after all this time, he was asking for her help again. "I don't know if I can do this," Mai whispered, her voice cracking. "I don't know if I can go back." "I understand," her father said quietly, his voice heavy with regret. "I've hurt you. I've made so many mistakes, but I'm trying to change, Mai. I've been sober for 3 months now. I want to make things right." The words hit her like a tidal wave. Sober. It was a word she had longed to hear but never thought she would. And yet, part of her couldn't believe it. She had been through this before, promises of change that were quickly broken. "I don't know if I can trust you," Mai said, her voice filled with a pain that had been buried for too long. "I know," her father replied softly. "I don't expect you to, but I wanted you to know that I'm trying. I'm really trying this time." Mai stood in the empty cafe, her heart torn between hope and fear. She had moved on, built a new life, and found happiness. But the past still had its hold on her, and now, with her father's voice in her ear, she didn't know what to do. "I'll think about it," she said finally, her voice barely above a whisper. "Thank you," her father said quietly. "That's all I can ask." When she hung up the phone, Mai stood there for a long time, staring at the screen. Her hands were trembling, her heart racing. She didn't know what this meant or what she was supposed to do next. All she knew was that the shadows of her past had resurfaced, and she wasn't sure if she was ready to face them. The weight of the phone call lingered long after Mai hung up. As she walked home from the cafe that night, her mind was a swirl of confusion and emotion. Her father's voice, so full of regret and pain, echoed in her head, and she couldn't shake the sense of responsibility that had settled deep in her chest. When she arrived home, Tom was waiting for her in the living room, working on one of his sketches. He looked up when she entered, his face lighting up with a smile, but it faded as soon as he saw the expression on her face. "What's wrong?" he asked, putting down his pencil and coming over to her. Mai sank into the couch, her hands trembling as she held her phone in her lap. "It was my dad," she whispered. "He called me." Tom's eyes widened in surprise. He hadn't asked much about her father since they moved, knowing it was a painful topic, but he could see the turmoil written all over her face now. "What did he say?" Tom asked gently, sitting beside her and taking her hand. Mai swallowed hard, her throat tight with emotion. "He said he's been sober for 3 months. He wants my help. He said he's trying to change." Tom was quiet for a long moment, his hand warm and steady in hers. How do you feel about that? I don't know, Mai admitted, her voice barely a whisper. I've heard it all before, Tom. I've seen him make promises and break them. I've watched him destroy himself and everyone around him. Part of me wants to believe he's really trying this time, but the other part doesn't know if I can trust him again. Tom nodded, his expression thoughtful. It's understandable. You've been hurt by him more times than anyone should have to endure. You don't owe him anything, Mai. Mai sighed, leaning back against the couch. But he's my father. No matter how much pain he's caused me, I can't just pretend he doesn't exist. And if he's really trying, I don't know if I can just walk away. Tom was quiet for a moment, and then he spoke, his voice gentle but firm. Whatever you decide, I'll support you. But you need to do what's best for you, and for Ben. You've built a new life here. You've found peace. Don't let the past pull you back into the darkness. Mai looked into Tom's eyes, her heart aching with the weight of his words. He was right. She had come so far, and she didn't want to risk losing everything she had worked so hard to build. But the thought of abandoning her father, of not giving him one last chance, filled her with guilt. I need time to think, Mai said softly, her voice trembling. Tom nodded. Take all the time you need. But remember, you don't have to go through this alone. Over the next few days, Mai found herself consumed by thoughts of her father. She tried to focus on her routine, on taking care of Ben and her job at the cafe, but the weight of the decision she had to make loomed over her like a dark cloud. She replayed the phone call in her head over and over, analyzing every word, every tone in his voice. Was he really trying this time? Could she trust him again after everything he had put her through? Late at night, when the house was quiet and Tom was asleep beside her, Mai would lie awake, staring at the ceiling, her mind racing with memories of her past. She remembered the nights when her father would come home drunk, angry, and violent. She remembered the look in his eyes when he lost everything to gambling, the desperation that seemed to swallow him whole. But she also remembered the man he had been before the addiction, before everything fell apart. He had been a good father once, loving and kind. There was a time when he had made her feel safe. Those memories haunted her, pulling at her heartstrings and making the decision even harder. One afternoon, as Mai sat in the cafe during her lunch, her phone buzzed. She looked down and saw a text from her father. I know you're unsure, and I don't blame you. I just want you to know that I'm trying. I'm not asking for much, just a chance to talk in person. Please, Mai. The message made her chest tighten. He was reaching out, trying to bridge the gap that had grown between them. But could she trust him? Was she ready to open that door again? As she stared at the message, lost in thought, her coworker, Maria, sat down across from her. You look like you've got the weight of the world on your shoulders, Maria said with a sympathetic smile. Mai sighed, setting her phone down. It feels like that sometimes. Maria was older, in her 50s, and had become something of a mentor to Mai since she started working at the cafe. She was warm, wise, and had a way of making Mai feel at ease. You want to talk about it? Maria asked, her voice gentle but knowing. Mai hesitated for a moment, then decided to open up. It's my dad. He's asking for a second chance, but I don't know if I can give it to him. Maria nodded, her expression thoughtful. That's a tough spot to be in. It's hard when someone you love keeps hurting you, but it's even harder when they try to change and you don't know if you can believe them. Mai nodded, her eyes downcast. Exactly. I want to believe him, but I'm so scared of getting hurt again. Maria was quiet for a moment, then she spoke softly. You've got to ask yourself what's best for you, honey. Not for him, but for you. You've been through so much, and you've come so far. It's okay to protect yourself, even if that means saying no to someone you care about. Mai swallowed hard, her throat tight. But what if he's really trying this time? What if I'm turning my back on him when he finally needs me the most? Maria gave her a sad smile. Sometimes the hardest thing to do is let someone face their own battles. You can't save him, Mai. Only he can do that. And if he's really serious about changing, he'll understand that you need to take care of yourself first. The words hit Mai hard, cutting through the fog of her thoughts. She had been so focused on what her father needed, on whether or not she could trust him, that she hadn't stopped to think about what she needed. Maria patted her hand gently. Whatever you decide, don't let guilt make the decision for you. You've got a beautiful life now, and it's okay to choose that. Mai nodded, her heart heavy but clearer than it had been in days. She had spent so long carrying the weight of her father's choices, trying to save him from himself, that she had forgotten to take care of herself. But now, with Tom and Ben, she had something worth protecting, something worth fighting for. That evening, Mai sat down with Tom after Ben had gone to bed. She had made her decision, but she wanted to talk it through with him before making the final call. I've decided to meet him, Mai said quietly, her voice steady. I don't know if I can trust him yet, but I owe it to myself to see if he's really changed. Tom nodded, his expression supportive. I think that's a good choice. Just remember, whatever happens, you don't owe him anything beyond that meeting. If you feel like he's still the same, you can walk away. I know, Mai said, her heart pounding with a mix of fear and hope. I just need to know if there's any chance he's really different this time. The next day, Mai made the arrangements. She agreed to meet her father at a diner just outside of town, a place that felt neutral, away from the memories of the past. As she sat in the booth, waiting for him to arrive, her hands shook with nervous anticipation. When her father finally walked through the door, her breath caught in her throat. He looked different, older, thinner, and more worn than she remembered. But there was something else too, a glimmer of humility in his eyes, a quiet desperation that hadn't been there before. He sat down across from her, his hands trembling as much as hers. For a long moment, neither of them spoke. Then, finally, her father broke the silence. "Thank you for meeting me," he said softly, his voice rough but sincere. "I know I don't deserve it, but I'm trying, Mai. I really am." Mai looked at him, her heart torn between hope and fear. She had spent so long running from the pain he had caused, but now, sitting here with him, she couldn't help but wonder if maybe, just maybe, things could be different. Sitting across from her father, Mai felt a strange mixture of emotions: anger, sadness, fear, and a flicker of hope she hadn't felt in years. The man before her was both familiar and unfamiliar, a ghost from her past who had caused her so much pain, yet now seemed humbled in a way she had never seen. Her father's eyes were red-rimmed, but there was no smell of alcohol on him, no signs of the man who had once spent days gambling away what little they had. Instead, he seemed frail, as if the years of addiction had drained him of his vitality. His hands trembled slightly as they rested on the table, and his voice, when he spoke, was quieter than she remembered. "I don't even know where to start," he began, his gaze lowered to the table. "I know I've hurt you more than I can ever make up for, Mai. I know I've done things that no father should ever do." Mai sat silently, her heart pounding in her chest. She had imagined this moment so many times, what she would say, how she would feel, but now that it was here, the words wouldn't come. Her father took a shaky breath and continued. "I've been going to meetings, trying to stay sober. It hasn't been easy. Most days, I still want to drink, still want to escape, but I keep thinking about you, about what I've done to you, and to your mother." Mai flinched at the mention of her mother, the pain of her abandonment still raw after all these years. Her mother had walked out on them when Mai was just a child, leaving her alone to deal with their father's spiraling addiction. It was a wound that had never fully healed. "I've been sober for 3 months now," her father said, his voice barely above a whisper. "And every day I think about how much I've lost, how much I've hurt the people I love. I don't know if I can ever make it right, but I want to try." Mai's chest tightened. She had heard similar words before, promises of change that had always been broken. But something in her father's eyes now, something in the way he spoke, made her pause. There was a sincerity there that hadn't been present in the past, a vulnerability that seemed almost foreign to her. "I don't know if I can believe you," Mai said finally, her voice trembling with the weight of years of disappointment and betrayal. "You've said this before. You've made promises, and then you've broken them. I've spent my whole life trying to pick up the pieces." Her father nodded, his expression filled with shame. "I know. I don't expect you to believe me, not after everything I've done. But I'm not asking for your trust right now, Mai. I'm just asking for a chance to show you that I'm different this time." Mai stared at him, her mind racing. Could he really change? Could she let herself believe that the man who had caused her so much pain was capable of redemption? I don't know if I can give you that chance, she said softly, her voice breaking. I've built a life without you. I've moved on. I have Ben to think about now. Her father's face softened at the mention of Ben, and for a moment, she saw the man he had been before the addiction took hold, the father who had once cradled her in his arms, the father who had promised to protect her. I know I don't deserve to be a part of his life, her father said quietly. I know I've lost that right, but I want you to know that I'm trying to be better for both of you. Whether or not you let me back into your life, I'm going to keep trying. Mai felt a tear slip down her cheek, and she quickly wiped it away. She wanted to believe him. She wanted to believe that her father could change, that the man who had hurt her so deeply could somehow find his way back to the person he used to be. But the scars ran deep, and the fear of being hurt again was almost overwhelming. I'm scared, Mai whispered, her voice shaking. I'm scared that if I let you in, you'll hurt me again. You'll hurt Ben. Her father's eyes filled with tears, and for the first time in her life, she saw him cry. I understand, he said softly. I don't want to hurt you anymore, Mai. That's why I'm not asking for forgiveness right now. I just want you to know that I'm trying. That's all. The raw emotion in his voice broke something inside of her, and for the first time, she allowed herself to feel the full weight of everything she had carried for so long, the anger, the hurt, the longing for a father she had lost to addiction. And in that moment, she realized that she didn't have to make a decision right now. She didn't have to forgive him or trust him immediately. But she could choose to see him for who he was in this moment, a man trying to find his way out of the darkness. I don't know if I can forgive you, Mai said quietly, her voice barely above a whisper, but I'll think about giving you a chance. Just don't make any promises you can't keep. Her father nodded, his face filled with relief. I won't. I promise. They sat there in silence for a while, the weight of the years between them hanging in the air. It wasn't the closure Mai had hoped for, but it was something. It was the beginning of something new, something fragile but real. That night, when Mai returned home, Tom was waiting for her, as always. She walked into his arms without saying a word, letting him hold her as she processed everything that had happened. She hadn't expected to feel so raw, so vulnerable after seeing her father, but now that she was home, the emotions came flooding in. How did it go? Tom asked softly, his hand gently stroking her hair. Mai took a deep breath, leaning into his embrace. It was hard, but I think he's really trying this time. Tom nodded, his arms tightening around her. Do you believe him? Mai hesitated, then nodded slowly. I think I do, but I'm still scared. I don't know if I can trust him, but I can't just walk away, not if he's really trying. You don't have to decide anything right now, Tom said gently. Take it one day at a time. You've already come so far. Mai smiled weakly, resting her head against his chest. I don't know what I'd do without you. You'll never have to find out, Tom whispered, kissing the top of her head. As they stood there in the quiet of their home, Mai felt a sense of peace settle over her. The road ahead was still uncertain, and the wounds of the past hadn't fully healed. But for the first time in a long time, she felt like she was moving forward, not just surviving, but living. Her father's return into her life wasn't going to be easy, and there were no guarantees that things would get better. But she was willing to take that first step to see if there was a chance for healing. For both of them. And maybe, just maybe, they could both find a way out of the darkness, together. The following weeks were a whirlwind of emotions for Mai. She kept her distance from her father, still unsure of how much trust to place in him, but she didn't completely shut him out. They began to meet occasionally at the diner, sharing short conversations over coffee. Each time, Mai could see the effort her father was making, the weariness in his eyes slowly giving way to hope. It was strange and unfamiliar, like seeing a version of him she thought had been lost forever. One afternoon, as she sat across from him in the diner, her father spoke quietly, his hands wrapped around a mug of coffee. I'm going to meetings every week, trying to stay on track. I know it's not enough, but I'm doing everything I can. Mai nodded, appreciating his honesty. She didn't ask for more. She had learned that promises were fragile, and she didn't want to rely on them. Instead, she chose to focus on his actions, on the slow but steady progress he was making. But despite the small steps toward healing, there was still a distance between them. Mai couldn't shake the feeling that something was holding her back from fully opening up to him again. The scars of her past ran deep, and while her father was trying to change, she wasn't sure if she was ready to let go of the pain. One evening, after putting Ben to bed, Mai sat on the porch with Tom, the cool evening air brushing against their skin. They had fallen into a routine of quiet moments like this, talking about their day, their future, and everything in between. But tonight, there was a heaviness in the air that Mai couldn't ignore. "I feel stuck," Mai admitted, her voice barely above a whisper. "I'm trying to forgive him, but I don't know how." Tom turned to her, his expression soft and understanding. "Forgiveness doesn't happen all at once. It's a process, and it takes time." Mai sighed, leaning her head against his shoulder. "I thought that once he started trying to change, it would be easier. But I'm still so angry. Every time I think about the things he did, the things I had to endure because of him, it all comes rushing back." Tom was quiet for a moment, then he spoke softly. "It's okay to feel that way. You're allowed to be angry, even if he's trying to change. Forgiveness isn't about pretending the pain didn't happen. It's about acknowledging it and deciding that you're not going to let it control you anymore." Mai swallowed hard, her throat tight with emotion. "But how do I let go of that anger? How do I move on?" Tom took her hand, his fingers warm against hers. "You don't have to do it all at once. Start small. Focus on the progress he's making now, not the mistakes of the past. And remember that forgiveness is for you, not for him. It's about freeing yourself from the weight of that pain." Mai closed her eyes, letting his words sink in. She knew Tom was right. She had spent so much of her life carrying the burden of her father's mistakes, allowing the anger and hurt to shape her decisions, her relationships, her view of the world. Maybe it was time to let some of that go. A week later, Mai decided to take a step she had been avoiding for a long time. She invited her father to the house. It wasn't an easy decision, and part of her was terrified of what it might mean to let him into her new life. But she knew that if she wanted to heal, if she wanted to truly move forward, she had to face this part of her past head-on. When the day arrived, Mai was a bundle of nerves. She had spent the morning cleaning the house, fussing over every little detail, even though she knew it didn't really matter. Ben was excited, though he didn't fully understand who her father was. He had only heard brief mentions of Grandpa over the years. Still, his innocent excitement gave Mai a sense of peace. When the doorbell finally rang, Mai's heart skipped a beat. She opened the door to find her father standing there, looking nervous and out of place. He held a small bouquet of flowers in his hand, something she hadn't expected. "These are for you," he said awkwardly, holding them out to her. "I wasn't sure if you'd like them, but I thought it would be nice." Mai took the flowers, her throat tightening with emotion. It was such a small gesture, but it meant more to her than she could put into words. "Thank you," she said softly, stepping aside to let him in. Her father entered the house slowly, looking around as if he was afraid to touch anything. He seemed almost overwhelmed by the simplicity of it all. The cozy living room, the framed pictures of Ben on the walls, the small signs of a life Mai had built without him. Ben came bounding into the room, his eyes wide with curiosity. "Is this Grandpa?" he asked, looking up at Mai with excitement. Mai smiled, nodding. "Yes, sweetheart, this is Grandpa." Her father's face softened as he crouched down to Ben's level. "Hey there, buddy. I'm your grandpa." Ben grinned, his eyes lighting up. "Want to play cars with me?" Her father chuckled, the sound of it strange but comforting. "I'd like that." As Ben led him into the living room, Mai stood back, watching the two of them interact. It was surreal. Seeing her father, a man who had once been lost to addiction, sitting on the floor playing with her son. It was a sight she never thought she would witness. For the rest of the afternoon, the three of them spent time together, talking, playing with Ben, and sharing stories. It wasn't perfect, and there were moments when the awkwardness of the past hung in the air. But there was also a sense of healing. Slowly, piece by piece, the walls that had been built between them began to crumble. That night, after her father had left, Mai sat on the porch again with Tom, reflecting on the day. It went better than I thought it would, Mai admitted, her voice soft. Tom smiled, leaning back in his chair. He's trying, Mai, and you're trying too. That's all that matters. Mai nodded, her heart full but still heavy with the weight of everything that had happened. I'm not there yet. I don't know if I'll ever fully forgive him. But today felt good, like maybe we're starting something new. Tom reached over and took her hand, giving it a gentle squeeze. That's all you need to do. Take it one day at a time. You've come so far, Mai. Don't forget that. Mai smiled, leaning into him as they watched the stars overhead. The road to forgiveness was long, and there were still many obstacles to overcome. But for the first time, Mai felt like she was no longer alone on that journey. Her father wasn't perfect, and neither was she. But they were both trying, and that was enough for now. As the night settled in around them, Mai allowed herself to feel something she hadn't felt in years: hope. Not just for herself, but for her father, for her son, and for the life she was building with Tom. They had come so far, and while the future was still uncertain, Mai knew one thing for sure. They were moving forward together, and for the first time in a long time, that was enough. The end. Let me know if you need any further adjustments or if you'd like to explore another story concept.